Okay, and all participants, if you could unmute. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which
for
it
which it
stands,
stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Excellent. Very nicely done as a group. Okay, next order of business is public comment. So at this time, I am going to open the floor for public comment for any of our attendees that we have on the line. Again, the process will remain where if you are interested in speaking, please raise your hand. And Devin will ask you to unmute, and then you can go ahead and speak after that point. Looks like we have Jay and Marcus right now, so. Okay. Looks like we're all set on public comment for tonight. Next order of business is minutes. And can I ask for a motion to approve the attached September 9th, 2020 minutes?
So moved. Second.
Okay, any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? All right, unanimously passed. Next order of business is correspondence. I don't believe we had any. Did we include any? I can't remember, Kat, in the agenda.
We did not receive any additional correspondence.
Okay, so between the time periods of 9/7 through 10/9, there were no additional correspondence, was no additional correspondence at that time. But again, we still encourage people to please continue to engage with the committee via the website is the best way to do that. It's great to get on the website just to review the overall project updates and status, as well as use that communication form to provide any input or ask any questions to us. So that's a great way to, if you can't make it to the meeting or aren't interested in doing public comments, a great way to stay connected with us. All right, we're going to go right into reports. As I mentioned kind of at the top of the meeting before we actually called to order, one of the first things I'd like to do, as I was kind of thinking more about the process in our conversations today, we usually have chair report right off the top, and that's currently how the agenda looks. I would like at this point to ask for a motion though. Well, actually, I'd like to put a motion forward to actually move that chair report down to the bottom of the list. I think it's going to make more sense if we hear the updates, and that's going to kind of help our conversation moving forward. So I'm going to make a motion to move that chair report item number 1 down to the bottom of the list. So that would actually become item number 7 on the list for tonight. If I could get a second for that.
I'll second it. This is Sharon.
Okay, any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, approved. Thank you for that. I just think it's going to make more sense in the context of our conversation as we move through updates tonight. Okay, so our first report then would be Communications Subcommittee report. Kathy, that's usually you. I don't know if you want us to kind of share that or.
Yeah, if I think if Kat had any items, I know that we're continuing to work on the videos, and you know, we did discuss the partnership that we had wanted to move toward to assist with communications, and I know that that was something that we also discussed. But Kat, do you want to add anything to that?
Video tool or side-by-side photos, some projects we have in the works.
Okay, you're super quiet.
I'm quiet.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me now?
Nope, same.
Oh man.
You want me to do the update quick while you're?
Yeah, I'll switch to my phone.
Okay. So yeah, as Kathy said, we've worked on a few things that are still in the works. We did get some additional updates are moving forward on the website, which I think is great. So Devin has been working with Cara to get some additional updates and get more information updated there, which is great. As far as tall timbers engagement, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the chair report. That is something we are moving forward with as well. So I think we're just kind of preparing communications and keeping steady on making sure that the information we do have is as up to date as possible. And then moving into the kind of our next stage of planning is really putting together that overall communication strategy and how we are going to move that forward. So the other piece of information is Wendy Koo, our newest member, is going to join us on the communications committee. So we did some adjustment to our schedule due to that. So we're moving our meeting times a little bit, which you'll see for agendas and other things for community members who also want to attend those. So you're going to see a change in the timing around those. But I think that was pretty much everything.
I'm back too, Meg.
Okay.
One other thing I just wanted to add is the town is sending out a townwide newsletter, and that should hit mailboxes this week if you haven't received it already. And there is just an update inside of that for the building committee. So it directs people to the website and explains where we are in the process right now. So that was sent to all residents this week.
Great. Anybody else on communications want to add anything?
Just that tomorrow I'll have a draft of the video. So the video tour video is available tomorrow for the communications subcommittee. Devin, I'll send that link to you so you have that. I'll be at the meeting, but I'll be at senior night for soccer as well. So Devin, maybe you can run the controls in the video tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Oh, excellent. I'm looking forward to seeing that.
And Meg, maybe I missed it, I think, and you may have said it already, just work on the website. It's been continuing.
Yeah, which is great work. Please, everybody, if you haven't been out there recently, go take a look. We're going to continue updates to those. It's going to be dynamic. So as I said, it's not something that we're going to come, if there are updates that are happening in between meetings, they're going to happen live on the website. So we figured that's the best way for us to get that communication out as quickly as possible. So, even us as committee members, go out there, take a look, see if there's anything you think we're missing, information that you think that's important that we're not highlighting, those kind of things. So all that feedback is important, I think, from everybody's perspective. So, anything I think, thoughts around that, send them right to Devin, and then he can kind of collect that and figure out if there's anything in addition we need to do. Okay, next report is Board of Education Liaison Report.
I have nothing to report. School is continuing, well, and we're just moving along, but there's nothing to report to the building committee right now.
Okay. All right. Town Council Liaison Report.
Okay. Yep. I have. I think a positive update. We met last night, and as everybody can imagine, right? We were waiting for the October date to come, and based upon placing the project on pause, which was sort of a collective decision based upon sort of the uncertainty of taxpayers' job, employment, salary cuts, et cetera, and then just the financial health of the town itself. And Joe Schwetke reported in last night, and I guess in summary, I can say, it's stable. The condition is stable, and there's no significant impact on taxes. There was about 155 applications for deferments on their taxes, which was about $650,000. But they have been paid but for about 40 additional delinquencies, and which is resulting in about a $70,000 shortfall. So again, I think it's sitting here right now. We say we got a very positive result as to the financial condition of the town, and the tax implications were not significantly impacted. So that was very good to hear. And we did not discuss the project per se last night, but I just want to take this opportunity that based upon this information, we'll having additional discussions going forward. And I want to take this moment to reiterate unequivocally that the town council remains 100% in favor of this project. It's unequivocal, and we're happy to hear the information we got from Joe last night. So you can anticipate further, discussions and issues, discussing the issue with the town council going forward. So, but it was a good report from Joe.
All right, great. I know, Kat, too, you might, I don't know if you're going to add any detail around what Chris just mentioned, but before we do that, any questions or anything for Chris from the committee?
I should add, Meg, I'll just maybe add additional, Joe did not opine or give us any details as to expenditures, but there was the opinion expressed that there may be, some higher than normal, maybe in a month or so, the next month we may get the expenditure forecast. But I think, as to no surprise, as with the Board of Education, there's additional expenditures relative to, COVID implications and spending, and then also on the elections and ensuring a safe voting environment. So that will come out, but generally stable and no significant impact on the taxes.
Oh, good. All right, perfect. Thank you for that clarification, Chris.
Meg, if I can ask a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Chris, is there anything, in the hopes of maybe restarting or at least setting the path forward to restarting, is there anything that the council would need from the building committee as an update or just kind of a reset?
I think, Meg, we're trying to, and we're going to try and get a meeting together shortly to make this an agenda item with, and then bring it back, to the council for consideration. But at this point, Beth, nothing that we need, I think, at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and to that point, Beth, that's going to be some of our conversation in that in our last agenda item during these reports. So during that chair report, you'll see us starting to open that conversation, I think, at the committee level, for us to really start talking about where are we, what's going on, what kind of questions do we have as a committee, and then so that we're prepared to bring that information forward to both the Board of Ed, if there's any questions that need to be directed in that way, or to town council as well. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Meg, I wonder, or Chris, as we go forward, might Joe be prepared to share something about where we are with the municipal AAA bond market? And is there anything that's going on right now that is different than some of the scenarios that Joe has presented in terms of how the town would handle existing debt that's sort of in the pipeline? Is there anything that's different than any of his projections based upon where the bond market is now?
At this point, I can't answer that in detail, Mike, other than, no surprise that you're not making a lot of investment income right now. And, it's a good time to borrow money. Joe commented, like, one of the unexpected perks in revenue was a lot of conveyance and real estate transfer taxes based upon a number of refinancings. So, he gave statements last night were limited to, it's a bad, and it's a good time to borrow, but a bad time to invest.
But I do think, to your point, Michael, I think it's part of the consideration, obviously, as we move forward with town council, and they're making some evaluations on timing and those kind of things, and what it means to us overall, what that financial forecast looks like now versus, and when they, as we move forward. Those are all kind of questions, I think, that are certainly going to impact the conversation of what it means to us. So all valid things for us to ask.
And the reason I bring it up too is it doesn't just, as Chris has mentioned, it's a great time to borrow. And so there are so many things that the town has on its agenda to borrow for.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be helpful for us to be alerted if the scenario of the universe of things that Joe was considering bonding for, if that were to change because we have a preferable rate right now to borrow, how does that change the total amount of outstanding debt that might otherwise be absorbed as a part of this project? So I just want to,
Yep.
I know we're concerned about our project, but our project is taken in context of the entire town. And if there was more to be bonded for right now, that would impact, I think, a number of the different scenarios that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, that wasn't discussed last night. So, but that will certainly, echoing what Meg said, that will obviously be part of our discussions going forward, and we'll gladly report back.
And just to jump in, Joe is constantly monitoring and forecasting and looking at all of these things. So I think asking for an updated financial forecast in the future is definitely something that Joe can put together. Mm-hmm. And it would be useful for us going forward.
So I think to that point, Michael, I think as we start to get into the conversation, you'll see us have in the chair report, that final agenda item, that will be some of the things that I think we can document as a committee to say, here's something that we think is, and it's certainly something that they know, town council knows is an important part of the process, but, we're aware as well. And that it's something that we can bring forward as, just a point of communication and a question to consider. Anything else for Chris from anybody? Okay. Kat, financial report is really not so much about the financial committee, but in general, any kind of financial information you'd like to share in addition.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of Chris, we got the deferment numbers and it was lower than anticipated. I think we kind of braced ourselves for more of a worst case scenario because it was open to anybody that could demonstrate being affected by COVID-19. So, all of our top taxpayers could have done the deferment program and only 155 applications were received. So that was positive. And as Chris and said and Joe reported is that we look like we're in a good position right now financially. So that was very good news. In terms of a committee report for finances, we haven't had any expenditures since our last meeting, so there's nothing really new there. But just continuing to monitor and I'll report as Joe reports. As Chris said, expenditures look like they're going to be coming to the council soon to see where we are. And with COVID and the elections and the amount of absentee ballots this year, there was a lot of funds that we had to expend. And the tropical storm, some of these are reimbursable by FEMA and other grant agencies, but this has been a tough year and we've had to adapt and spend some money related to the pandemic and the election. So more to come as we move forward.
This is Ellen. I just have a quick question for Kat. Kat, do those deferment numbers cover our commercial taxpayers?
Yeah, we have to get a breakdown, and that's a question I have for Joe, is what percentage was commercial versus residential? It could have been for either. It was for taxes, waste, and sewer use fees. So what we're looking at right now is finishing up the 40 delinquencies that we have on those deferments and moving forward. But yeah, I can get a breakdown to see what that came from, our commercial or mostly our residential base. So that'd be helpful.
This is Wendy. I have a quick question. So I don't know if you would be able to answer this, but for the deferment program, is that a one-time program or is this something that could come to the table come January?
The deferment program was adopted by the council earlier this year. It was part of the governor had made an order that the town council could choose a deferment program. There was another program that they could have chosen to help those with COVID-19. As of right now, it was a one-time thing. I don't know if anything's going to come from the state for additional deferment programs when the January taxes come due, but it was a one-time thing. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything as you guys voted on it.
Yeah. No, my understanding is at the Cats, it was a one-time based upon the directive of the governor. But Wendy, I would say you know, if you're watching the news and you're seeing spikes in numbers again, and where it could Governor Lamont issue a similar declaration for the January period? I don't know, but right now is a one-time.
Anything else? Just around overall financial information we received tonight? Okay, all right, we'll move on to number 6, state legislative update. So we'll pass this on over to Mark, if there's anything.
So nothing really changing on the legislative, other than they did approve 2021 grants for about 500 million. They are, we don't know what the forecast will look like next year, but the application submission deadline is still the same, that June 30th deadline. So, certainly a target to be discussed.
Okay, any thoughts or questions for Mark around that, or anything anybody's wondering about?
Mark, this is Richard. I'm just curious if you've heard any talk about any additional grants for COVID or COVID measures for new projects.
So good question. No, we have not. So there's nothing, not school related. So anything that's that I've heard. I don't know if Chris has heard anything, but I would say no. I don't think Chris has an option to speak here. I'm getting a confirmation as well from Chris, none. So there's really nothing out there, that we've seen, at least not school related.
Okay, thanks.
Mark, I have a question. Was there anything, given the extraordinary negative economic circumstances in the state, that that changed or reduced any of the reimbursements that people were asking for? Any of the grants that didn't get accepted because of the economic situation?
No, everything right now is status quo.
Okay.
We haven't, we haven't seen anything change from that. There's been some legislation that's kind of we've seen, some legislators get involved more in down in Norwalk and a couple other areas, but not necessarily COVID related. So we haven't. There's been no action based on the impact, and we haven't seen anybody's reimbursements change or anybody not be accepted because of anything not included in their grants. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, sadly, there's been no changes or motivation for schools in that direction. And I think, the other thing to keep in mind too is I think we won't see anything change until the schools, till OSCG changes requirements that, till there's some legislation passed that changes what goes into schools based on, based on infection control changes and things like that. So until those changes go into effect, I don't think we'll see any funding that would respond differently.
I don't necessarily interpret what you're saying as sad news. I think the consistent concern or challenge that gets raised is, well, what about next year? Well, what if the funding doesn't exist? And I don't know that I can imagine a worst case scenario than this year. And what you're reporting is that the commitment to continue with reimbursements has stayed steady.
Yeah, so correct. So in that respect, yes, good news.
Okay, anything else anybody'd like to ask or share? All right, we'll move on to next report, which is industry updates. So Richard, I'll send this over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So since we last spoke, I have had additional communication with professional cost estimators, construction managers, and general contractors, the size of which would be appropriate for your project. And the bottom line, my recommendation is that as far as escalation is concerned, whether or not COVID-19 has had an impact on escalation, I think my recommendation is that we stay the course. What does that mean? Well, just as a reminder, our estimator for your project was carrying an escalation factor of 3.75% per year, which is a good number. Professional estimators, or he anyway, indicated that he generally recommends anywhere from 3 to 4% per year. That's been his recommendation for the recent past. And then, so he is on the higher end of that spectrum. Last time I reported that we've seen a downturn in cost, and I attributed it to contractors being more eager for work. And I discussed that with construction managers and general contractors to find out what their experience has been recently during this pandemic. And they've had similar kinds of experiences. One reported that he was getting major subcontract bids on the order of 25, 26% less, which is way too low in that particular construction manager's opinion. And his feeling was that he's getting bids from subcontractors who are just trying to create a backlog of work in a panic. That there's some fear on the part of some subcontractors that they need to bid low in order to guarantee that they have work for themselves. But everyone seems to be saying that this is not going to last, that this is a temporary blip, and that there will be a bounce back, and that we'll go back to the normal rate again. I also looked at something called the Turner Building Cost Index. This is an index, construction cost index that's published by Turner, and they report it on a quarterly basis, and they show a steadily increase in costs up until the last quarter. The second quarter of 2020, they actually show negative growth, minus 1%. Again, I think the feeling is that it's a blip in the overall history of construction costs. Similar to what happened back in 2008, 2009, when there was a economic crisis, and then prior to which there was a steady increase averaging about 3 or 4% per year, and then all of a sudden it dropped because there was a panic. But then it bounced back again. So what I reported last time was just, I think, a temporary phenomenon. I think that the fact that I'm getting similar kinds of experiences from other people, and the recommendation is that it's going to bounce back. Leads me to believe that we should continue with the same rate of escalation that we had been carrying for your project. I also reached back to Tom Harden. Tom Harden is the cost estimator that prepared your estimate for us. And he is a member of a national organization of professional cost estimators, the Association of Professional Estimators. And he attends group meetings and seminars and discussions with his peers. And according to him, nobody in his organization is doing anything to adjust their escalation factor, that they're all saying, just stay what you've been recommending, that this is just, COVID is just a temporary impact. And that he feels also that there are bidders who are just temporarily trying to ensure their success during this COVID period by bidding low to ensure that they get work. And then what will happen is that those bidders may end up being busy, and they're not going to be able to bid on work that's then coming out in about a year from now. And so there's going to be a reversal. There's going to be people who are not going to be bidding because they've stocked up so much backlog of work that there will be fewer bidders. And so that's what causes the prices to escalate again. So bottom line, I'll say what I said at the beginning of my spiel, which is just stay the course. Keep the escalation factor that we've been carrying in the project. And hopefully the project will go out to bid sooner rather than later, because escalation does erode your purchasing power. So that's all I have to report tonight.
Any questions for Richard based on that information?
I think I would just echo what Richard had to say. We reached out to a couple of cost estimators as well. Some on the subcontractor side as well as the CM side. I think on the subcontractor side, we're seeing exactly what Richard's reporting out, that the competition is taking jobs just to backlog work. There are some one-offs that we're seeing now with materials like wood, for example. If you're planning to build a wood frame building, the escalation in wood is anywhere 40 to 70%, and availability of things is hard to get. So material lead time items, those kinds of things are all causing problems today. But again, no one is looking to that prediction, in years in terms of escalation. So I think, Richard, you're absolutely right. We stay the course, keep that same percentage of escalation, because I do feel like what we're hearing in the industry is the fact that, yes, it is a blip.
So I'll comment, because a month ago, Richard, we had opposite views because we're in different businesses. And I will say it's still opposite in that, we're seeing, lack of supply, prices through the roof. Our average lumber increase per house is somewhere in the $17,000 to $20,000 house range. But I will agree with you, it is a blip. We are looking at, status quo probably sometime in January, February, where things start to calm down again, and kind of the supply issues were, from a supply side, they were cut back, and then there was more demand than people anticipated. But we're quickly catching up. Some of the stuff we heard a month ago is non-existent now. We're just facing new issues with different products. So I do agree it's a blip, and we're in our business and in the residential side, we're pretty much staying the course.
Great.
Anybody else have any other thoughts or questions around that? Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I think we got a lot of good information there in reports. I think it's going to help us as we move on to this final report item, which would be the chair report at this point. A couple things before I open up the conversation, I think that's very important for us as a committee to have tonight. First of all, one thing I did want to share with this committee, and I don't believe we mentioned it last time, was the announcement, this is bittersweet news, of Tim Harris's retirement from the district. And obviously that would also mean him moving on from our committee as well. So unfortunately, I don't believe he's on with us tonight, which is perfectly fine, as he should not be in his retirement. But you know, I've extended my gratitude and appreciation to him for his knowledge and support of the project in all its phases. And just having that level of expertise was so critical for our project. And he also has said that if we need anything, he is there to support us and to make sure we include him in our ribbon cutting ceremony, which we certainly will. So he will never leave the committee forever. It's impossible now. He's linked and tied to us and probably can never get away. But again, you know, I wish he was here to hear it, but I'm sure we all feel the same way, that we're happy for his retirement, certainly well-deserved, so well-respected across the district for everything he's done, but, you know, as well as on the committee. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew that was the case, in case they didn't see Tim with us moving forward. But maybe we'll get a surprise visit here and there from him, you never know. The other piece of information I want to talk about, just kind of tying it back a little bit to our conversation last month, was around, Michael, you had brought up some conversation around construction manager role and where that fits in the overall project plan and where it stands. I had touched base, reached out, talked with Richard, talked with Mark and Chris, you know, tried to get an understanding of where that all fits and what makes sense for us as far as the additional costs associated with bringing that resource on, when it makes sense to do so, what knowledge they would bring to the table right now versus at other stages of the project. Based on what I heard, I think it does make sense for us to still stay the course on it being a post-referendum support for us. I don't know if Richard and Mark, if you want to provide any more feedback, but just on knowledge base, what we're hearing, the information we're getting from Richard and Mark, as well as Johnny, as you can see, brings in some of that knowledge for us as well, kind of rounding out some of the thoughts around you know, pricing and how that affects the project overall. And I think that's, as we look at how we stretch our costs and where it makes the most sense, I think post-referendum is going to make the most sense for us. So I don't know, Mark and Richard, if you want to provide any other information on that or thoughts.
Sure, I'll jump in. I think very early in the project, we may have had a conversation about it, but I think that at that time, knowing that the project was ending up being pretty much a new project, it's 90% new, 10% is saving the 900 wing and doing renovation work. I think our feeling was that there is less complication in such a project, that there is less phasing complications, less issues to be worked through that needed to be priced. So we felt that we should continue using our estimator up until referendum, and then post-referendum, maybe there's a need for construction manager services. That's my view of the matter. If it were a little bit more complicated, if we were still looking at different options, then maybe it might make sense to bring someone in pre-referendum. But at this point, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I would agree. I think from a constructability standpoint, looking at a new building versus a renovate as new, we feel like we've got the resources on board at the moment to identify, you know, any value engineering, cost saving ideas up until, you know, post referendum, when we start getting into the real design documents of this and getting into the details. That CM is going to be more valuable. I think you'll get a more value add out of your dollars spent at that point.
I would agree. Some things that CMs do, once we get into the details, is do constructability reviews and going out to the marketplace and maybe looking at what are some alternatives. That's something we've done with CMs in the past. We had projects in which we looked at precast systems, and so those CMs would reach out to precast fabricators. We would have meetings with them, and those prefabricated precast fabricators would actually come back with some advice, and those that advice would be incorporated into the details, which ended up being a more cost-effective way to do it. And when I remember a similar situation, we were looking at auditorium details, using the CM as a constructability reviewer, and then someone who would bring in millwork contractors to review our details. That became extremely valuable. So that would certainly come into play should you want to go that route for some additional eyes on the details post-referendum.
Are you able to give any perspective with, particularly with school projects, in terms of the delta between work where estimators have come in at a process of where we are of schematic drawing and where CMs have come in terms of cost?
No, I don't have at my fingertips any kind of differential between the two. Professional estimators are good at what they do. CMs are good at what they do. We've worked with both. I think at this stage, I think what we've done is brought in very good, experienced cost estimator. I'm not sure I have in my fingertips any kind of differential between where one comes in on bid date versus where the other one comes in on bid date. I really don't.
I don't think I could say either. I do say, with Tom, and there's a handful of others where, I mean, school construction is their niche. That's what they do, day in and day out. So they're, sometimes their square foot prices at the top of their head, pretty darn close at the end of the day. So, we put a lot of confidence in that process, especially on the new build side.
I guess the challenge is that the scope of job is different. One actually builds things, the other one estimates based upon, their historical record and trying to get a read for things. And the reason I bring it up is that having gone through both of those processes recently in a healthcare related project, the work came out with a surprisable difference. And so I would hate for us to get to a space later in this process of where someone else who professionally is engaged to build these things says, well, no, in fact, my numbers are this. And we reach a level of disappointment with a short fuse on how to fix that. So, I understand the process. I get it. And I just raised the question of, if we don't have any information about the delta between, which would surprise me, because we could look at any of the historical projects that have passed through and say, so where were your cost estimators and where did your GMP come in, presuming that you moved from schematic design into a relatively static process of design documents and construction documents. It's just a matter of, one of them actually builds the building. And so if people are feeling comfortable that, for a small amount of money that could be paid on a pre-construction basis because a CM wants to be able to get involved, I don't think it's a huge dollar amount and kind of get somebody who's engaged. But if it's perceived as sort of belts and suspenders is not necessary, then I'll defer to others. I'd relay that in a healthcare related project, it was surprising to see the difference between what estimators would put together and what CMs would put together. So I have no point of reference of how that delta changes in education.
Neither do I. I really don't. And unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of doing both and finding out both for the same project. What might help, though, Michael, is if a CM were brought on board post-referendum, and at that point, it's a real project. There's no question that the project is going to proceed because it's passed referendum. You've got town support. then when the CM is brought in, and you would select a CM based upon qualifications, which I applaud that method rather than in a bid situation. Just bring in an experienced CM who's done a lot of public school work, knows the market, and knows the subs, and can weed out the subs who are lowballing. And that's really where some dangers are. And I think the real benefit is having a CM being able to guide the bidders to bid on this project and make sure that those bids are qualified. If after the referendum you bring in a CM and he works in parallel with our cost estimator, so now you have a way to debate and reconcile numbers, and there should be a consensus between the cost estimator, who is going to ultimately be responsible for building the project, for a guaranteed price, and an independent estimator working in parallel and then at regular stages reconciling their opinions. I think that's really a tremendous value. So I would applaud that approach, but again, if it's not a true project yet, meaning it hasn't passed referendum yet, I'm not sure that the quality of the estimating effort on the part of the CM will be as highly in tuned as a project that actually is post-referendum. And then I would be really looking for a method of touching base with subcontractors. Now here's where a CM would be of tremendous value. That CM who has done a lot of work in the marketplace with a lot of subcontractors has the horsepower to call in a subcontractor and say, I want you to look at these design development drawings. And I want you to give me your opinion about whether there's a better way to do the ductwork. Is there a better way to coordinate all of the mechanical trades, for example? Is there a better way, a more efficient way to do precast, more like in my experience that I gave you a minute ago? If I try to reach out to subcontractors and try to get them to give me their attention, I'm not going to be as successful as a CM who works with these guys all the time and who rely on the CM for a continuous stream of work. So believe me, I'm not discounting the value of a CM, but I think at this stage of the game, it probably will not be as valuable as post-referendum.
Yeah, I think, in our experience on current other projects right now, one municipal project, they too are waiting to hire a CM post-referendum, and they're waiting, but they want to be prepared. So they want to have that CM contract ready to go. They want to have an idea of who they want to reach out to. And so that the minute that referendum is approved, that, they're ahead of the game on the process of bringing that, that having that RFP ready to go and out the door for solicitation. So that's one process. On a healthcare side, we're doing exactly what you did, Michael, and bringing the CM in early on right into conceptual drawings and looking at phasing, because it's going to play a huge role in how we are successful on that job and could impact tremendously the costs of the project, and looking for ways to reduce costs and labor efforts and how we're going to actually pull this off in an occupied space. So I think there we feel a CM is extremely valuable in the process of design and flow of construction and material selection. So,
you talk about bringing a CM in post-referendum. Is that again still on a clearly on a pre-construction basis? What do you typically see in the education space for the cost of somebody getting involved in a pre-construction capacity?
I don't know that I have the answer to that question off the top of my head, Michael, but I think I could probably we could probably look to a couple different scenarios and give you an idea of what that is. Whether it's a percentage of that contract or really you're bringing them in for a lump sum pre-construction cost. And then, if the job is awarded, you go post-construction. One of the things too is that you're looking to select them and be their partner moving forward. I know we've also seen CMs come in just for pre-con, and the idea is they hope that they're selected for construction. But a dollar size on a $140 million project, I don't know, it'd be hard to say. Richard, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, I've seen it in the $100,000 to $200,000 range. And the way I would recommend you structure that deal is that it would be a two-part contract. The first is for pre-construction, and you would pay them a fee. It would be a fee that you negotiate. And again, I would probably estimate in that $100,000 to $200,000 range to get all of their pre-construction advice, their constructability reviews, a detailed review of our details as we develop them. And then if you're happy with them, you can then authorize them to go out to bid. And then that would be the second part of the contract with them. If they've done their job, then they can certainly build the project for a guaranteed maximum price after it's been bid. But also you can terminate or not execute the second part of that contract if you're not happy with their services. And I've been in a situation once where the CM was not continued with. In fact, the owner decided to GC bid it. Even after benefiting by all of the CM's reviews, it just ended up being an unhappy marriage for one reason or another. And the owner said, well, we're just gonna GC this thing. And the project turned out fine. So again, you can, after a referendum, knowing that the project is definitely going to go ahead, really get serious interest from CMs, and you're going to get good competitive numbers for those CM services, and they're going to work hard. And I think it's a better situation. So my recommendation is, what I think Chris had a good suggestion is try to develop a RFP that you could issue. You could issue it sooner than the referendum, and then the execution of it would be contingent upon a successful referendum. Chris, I don't know if you've done those kinds of RFPs in which you notify the market out there that this is still subject to referendum approval, and if its referendum is approved, then you do the interviewing ahead of time and then make a selection later.
We're working on that process right now, similarly with another municipality, much smaller project, but town building.
Okay, I think that's something we can definitely think about, even if it's bringing that professional partnership committee back together. It's a similar process to what we've done with our other professional partners and bringing them on board, starting to talk about that, that information, what we're looking for, what the RFP could look like, what we need to include to make sure that we're lined up and ready to go when the time comes. I think that's certainly something we can move forward on. Any other thoughts or questions on that CM process or the conversation? Okay, so final item of discussion tonight, which I think is super important, part of our overall discussions when we were talking about the kind of the timeline last week. If you remember, I kind of pulled forward a PowerPoint slide that we had discussed in the spring about where we were, what was going on, and what everything's going to look like moving forward. So I wanted to kind of level set a little bit again on what we're currently doing right now, And so that everybody's clear on kind of next steps and how this process is going to go moving forward. So when we really evaluate what we're doing right now, there's some things in here that are going to be familiar and some that are going to be new to everybody. So again, we are going to continue to meet monthly as we are right now, trying to get updates as we hear more information. And right here in this example of this meeting, we saw kind of a change month to month based on Richard's update and what he learned. So I think it's important for us obviously to stay engaged, learn as more information comes forward. And I think we will certainly keep all those meetings on our calendar moving forward. We've always talked about one of the steps of this committee is to collaborate and communicate with town council and Board of Ed. So there is a meeting scheduled, I believe it's Friday morning now, with the town council chair, Board of Education chair, and myself to sit down at the table to start having the conversations about next steps moving forward and what that means. And Chris, I think you're also involved in that meeting as well as our liaison. So we need to really think about what those next steps are, and that's going to be part of our conversation tonight. So I want to be prepared for that meeting. I want to be able to be a good representative for our committee. So those some of the conversations we're going to have coming up. The next bullet there you see is work with Tall Timbers and the communications subcommittee to prepare communication. So as I mentioned earlier, this is something we have committed to as a committee moving forward. We already actually approved funding for this, if you do remember back in the spring as well, before we went on pause, to bring Tall Timbers on to really help us with that communications planning. So actually there's a meeting tomorrow with the head of Tall Timbers to have an initial conversation on, okay, here's where we are, this is what we know, how do we move forward, and what kind of scenarios do we have, and what does that mean for timing? So all these things now you'll see are going to start to move forward to really get us prepared and ready once some of these larger decisions are made on the overall timeline. And then that final bullet, as Chris mentioned there, so he's important to us as a member of our committee and as a member of town council to keep us in constant communication. As he mentioned in his update earlier, you know, everything that comes out of this meeting as well as what's coming out of town council is going to be moving back and forth, and he will obviously provide updates both ways and allow us to keep those channels open. So those are all things, some of those, as I said, some of those meetings are new information for everybody, but other things are things we've been talking about, and I just want to make sure everybody's clear that those things are moving forward. And that we really need to rely on the process that we have in place, rely on the people that we have in place to make sure our communication stays solid, and that we keep that collaboration right at the forefront of our conversation. So although everybody at the table has different kind of decisions to be made and ability to make those decisions, should still be collaborative, and the communication needs to flow certainly within town and between town council, Board of Ed, and the committee. So, you know, as we start having these conversations, just keep thinking of it that way. What questions do we have potentially for town council, which we started? What questions might we have for Board of Education? What things do we need to know? What do we need to make sure that they know to help make decisions moving forward? So, keeping those kind of bullet points in line, I want to make sure we have that conversation. So if we go on to the next slide, this is kind of the beginning of those discussions. As high level can be. Now CSG worked on our calendar view that we've seen previously on potential scenarios and what it could look like. And I think that's kind of the step 2 to the conversation that we're going to have tonight, where we really plan out what target dates look like and what our scenarios look like based on when certain decisions are made. But really it comes down to kind of these 3 things that we have up here on the screen. The very first thing you see and with that big green arrow is that June 30th, 2021 grant submission deadline. That date we know doesn't move. We just heard it didn't move last year. It's not going to move, or excuse me, this year. It's not going to move next year. And we need to be committed and everybody needs to understand, not only us, but town council and Board of Ed, that date is not going to move and we need to hit it. So we will be submitting a grant on June 30th or prior to June 30th of 2021. So that is something we need to keep in mind and make sure that we're moving forward to do. We are prepared. We have schematic design. We have all the pieces and components we need to complete that grant submission. There's a few pieces that we do need. One of the things we will need for grant submission is either the results of a completed referendum or a referendum date moving forward. So that's where the next part of this conversation comes in, is we really have two scenarios that we're looking at. Option one, hold a referendum in Q2, which is something we've been talking about as a potential. So I think as a goal, we kind of always had that in mind as we went on pause. We keep moving forward to that Q2 referendum date, and what does that mean? But I think realistically, we also need to put on the table the possibility of an option two, which is a Q4 referendum. Now you see those two dates because it makes sense for us to kind of maybe align this vote with other votes that could be happening in town. So maybe looking at an April referendum date when there's already a vote scheduled, and a November vote as well for next year. So this is kind of the options. These are nothing that's been determined, nothing that's been discussed at this point. And what I wanted to do is start the conversation first and foremost within our committee to look at these, really think about what we're discussing, and bring forward concerns, questions, have an open dialogue within the community to say, what do people think about these things? What are they concerned about as we move forward? What information do we need to know that we don't know? What kind of questions do we need to ask town council? And we've come up with a couple already. So I have down here, Michael, your question around the bonding impact. I think that's something we can write down as a question that we have moving forward. And Ellen had her question around the breakdown and the deferment, residential versus commercial. So pieces of information that we think are valuable to us, and we need to document that and get it to the right people to get the answers that we need, as well as document information we think is important for the Board of Ed and Town Council to know, so that we're making a informed decision overall. So what I wanted to do is kind of open this up for conversation within the committee tonight to say, just tell me your thoughts. What's going on? What's going on in your heads? What concerns do you have? What thoughts, just anything that you think we need to have out on the table and discuss tonight as we start thinking about making these larger decisions.
I guess I'll start.
Yeah, go ahead, Johnny.
I mean, honestly, I'm still just up in the air. You know, altogether, everything in our lives in the last 6 months has been completely upended. And how we translate that into this project, bringing it out too soon and, you know, not really having a pulse on what's going on out in the community, et cetera. But I have to, you know, guess that they're feeling a lot of the same things we're feeling in our businesses and our, you know, our daily lives and everything. We are still not anywhere near status quo. You know, the fear of things spiking back up over the winter and how that's going to affect us in our personal lives. And I only say that because that's, you know, the voting public is the one they're the ones we have to convince. And in order to take on a project this large, people have to feel like the town's in good financial position, that the project that we're putting forward not only met the needs of what we put together in the last, you know, 12 months or so, but also how that has changed, or if it's going to change in the next 6 months with things going on. I don't think there'll be drastic changes, but the public will be asking those questions. So, you know, I am hesitant to talk about a referendum in the spring at this moment in time. You know, obviously 6 months ago, I was saying something completely different. So in 6 months, it could be completely different again. But at this moment in time, as we sit here tonight, I would be hesitant to push something too early and make sure that, and not make sure that we have everything lined up.
I'm looking for other people's thoughts or just concerns. I mean, I'm not looking for answers. I think, Johnny, what you're saying is what we need to articulate. We don't have answers, but I think we still need to have these conversations and really talk about what are we concerned about? What are the pros and cons of each of these possible options? You just named one. For option one, is the con is that, potentially we might not be in the place we want to be in, and we could push this out to a vote prematurely, and it could not, end in a result that I don't think any of us sitting at the table tonight want. But there's also concerns around option one potentially, right? Where you could be looking at saying, the longer we push it, it's we're losing momentum. There's concern around that, and does it really make sense? And there's always going to be unknowns, and we need to face those unknowns head on and put something out there that we think makes sense. I'm just saying, I'm not advocating one way or the other tonight. I'm just saying, I think we have to look at pros and cons and really think about it as a committee that's really been, we're the ones that have been most engaged in these conversations, to understand what's at the table, what's at stake, but also the importance of this project overall for the community and what the impacts of the community are as well. So I think well stated, Johnny, that we don't have the answers, and I'm not looking for answers. I'm looking for thoughts, concerns, anything that anybody wants to bring to the table.
Hi, this is Sharon. I would agree with Johnny. I think it's too soon to make a decision. Going before June 2021 might be kind of a risk. We really don't know what's going to happen with COVID during the winter. Maybe we can readdress it again in a couple months and see how things are, what the general public feeling is, and see how we are doing.
Meg, as you say, you're not looking for answers, but our thoughts on this. One of the things that I think we've all teed this up and believe that the project that we've got now makes sense. What we're talking about is its saleability to the community and its relevance to the community. And so perhaps I'll offer two things. One is how might another indice to track is consumer confidence. And I think, it was back in a great place in January when we were getting all of this packaged. And I think that's an important key indicator to look at, as many other things we've talked about in terms of where costs are going and where interest rates are going. But I think consumer confidence, I'd want to keep a close eye on that to help us position this for the most favorable way it can be received by the town. Because I don't think people's perceptions change around the relevance or importance of this project. I think what changes is people's confidence in being ready to move forward in any aspect of life. So that's one thing to take a look at. And then the other idea to float out there is it worth our effort in the communications group to perhaps do some survey? Not now, because I think it's a little perhaps premature, but I could be wrong on that in terms of the timing. But I just wonder, are those two things that two measurements that might help us gauge as to when an appropriate time to take this vote? And it sounds like the range that we have is anywhere from now probably until end of November. Is that right? In terms of a restriction on the time of when a referendum would need to take place after submitting the grant proposal on June 30th?
November 15th is our deadline.
November 15th. So if we understand that that's our window, what point in time might we want to consider evaluating where that consumer confidence index is and perhaps doing some polling on our own to gauge receptivity to this? Because it's really just a matter of, we're not repackaging this proposal. It's just, when does it become most saleable?
Correct. Yeah, it really, Kat, do you want to talk quickly about the survey piece? that Michael just mentioned?
Yeah, so, yeah, absolutely. We did approve a phone survey. We've already had basically a down payment on that. I spoke to the Center for Research and Public Policy last week. He's been checking in with us, and basically they're ready whenever we want to go. I think it's important to hear from the community. I mean, we keep saying there, you know, when is the right time, and is it now? Like maybe we float that out to the community. We're also, as Meg mentioned, meeting with Tall Timbers. I know in a lot of their communications they've done for other towns, they've had paper surveys and they've had other ways to get feedback from the community, and we can direct some questions to them directly through those means. I think it's important, speaking about Tall Timbers, for us to work with them and prepare so that once town council does decide on a date, whether it's option 1 or option 2, we're ready to hit the ground running because we've done the brainstorming with Tall Timbers to say, okay, you know, here's a potential referendum. Let's back that out and see what we have to do to make this happen. And it's all about timing, like you said, Michael. It's when is this the best time to put this project out? Because all of us at the table here, we want what's best for this project. We want a positive referendum, and it's unprecedented times. So I think we just have to really pay attention to these things and do all we can do as a committee to prepare. So when we get the green light, we're ready to go.
I think we have to consider what else is the town being asked to, you know, to absorb over the year. Are there other things that they're being asked to vote on? So all of those things, you know, come into play in terms of what that, you know, what the overall feeling is going to be of the residents of Farmington.
Anybody else have any other thoughts? Anything at all is what I'm looking for here. Concerns, even if you think it's kind of like, it's an outlier, something we don't, I mean, I think we just need to get everything that we're thinking right now on the table so that we can kind of gather those thoughts.
I'll just add that, you know, this idea of being ready for a CM and us continuing to meet so that we don't miss the window is important. That we keep the conversation going, and you know, in my business, obviously I get to make decisions on my own, so we're flexible and maybe not on my own. I do have partners, but that being said, we can, you know, be nimble and react quickly. Where as a committee in a town, you know, obviously we have to follow protocols that I wouldn't do in my day to day. But that we need to be as ready as possible. So if things do change, because as I stated earlier, 6 months ago, this was all brand new. In 6 months, it could be old news. And there's, you know, not a lot of time in between. We just have to make sure that we're ready for anything. And we have these conversations continuing as we go.
This is Richard. I'm just curious how Farmington has been handling public meetings. Is it all Zoom? Is it a hybrid? Do you have any in-town open meetings? I think some thought needs to be given on how the communications will continue going forward. I mean, are there meetings held anywhere else in town? I'm just curious.
Richard, I can answer that for the town. For the most part, we are still on Zoom like we are right now. The town council has been meeting the last 2 meetings. It's been done in person with masks and plexiglass in between, and that the audience is on Zoom. So that's kind of what we've been calling our hybrid model. But for the most part, all the other boards and commissions are meeting on Zoom, and even for internal meetings, we meet on Zoom as often as we can. Just because we're, you know, things are ticking up and we're still in the midst of it.
Board of Education is meeting, it's very similar to town council in a hybrid. We do allow audience members to be online or in person. So we have 2 classrooms at the high school that individuals can be socially distanced and be in person. So there's a choice to either be in person or online remotely.
Are there any major votes coming up? When are you voting on your budget?
We do that in March. The budget workshops begin, and then the final vote is sent to public hearing at the beginning of April for an April referendum. So early next year, we kind of start that public budget process.
Will this be your first Zoom public hearing on the town budget?
We did do an amendment to the budget. The town council had approved it, and then COVID hit. So they went back before and things changed. We didn't have a town meeting like we normally do. We didn't have a referendum like we normally do. The town council became the authority for that. So we have done it. We did a 0% increase this year, so things did get changed. So we do have some experience with that now, doing a public hearing over Zoom.
Well, the reason I'm asking the question is, do you think the town council would be comfortable tackling this referendum question in the springtime, or in preparation for a springtime referendum, whether it's April or not? That means that the town council probably needs to deliberate when? January, February?
Yeah, Richard, it would probably be, sooner. And I don't, echoing Johnny's statements, I don't think we should, take our foot off the pedal at all and be ready at any given moment. But we're as a council, 100% on board with the project, and we want to be ready to go. I mean, I think, as Meg said, we're going to meet on Friday morning, so this will be a good first step to get this back as a discussion point with the council, so we're ready to go. So I think we should be ready to go as a council and as a building committee to, based upon the vagaries of the COVID virus and as people have said, the appetite within the community. But I don't think we should be ready to go for an April referendum and a November referendum. We should be ready, however it gets us there. I don't know if it's Zoom or whatever. We got to be ready to do whatever we can to make sure whenever we decide that the best time to push it through is.
Okay.
Yeah.
One other thing, just maybe to ask, and I'm sure there'll be varying opinions on this. How would we, what's the value of having, how would it affect the referendum if you have a vote in November for open town council positions? And I'm not saying that someone has an answer to that, but I'm just saying the impact of that. How might we consider, does that become sort of a defining position for people who are running for town council if this is on the ballot just after an election in November or just before an election in November? And I'm not sort of looking at what's the predictor on that, but just a sense of, this year if we were considering just before November or just after November, we're looking at something that has, I think, almost zero impact on a town election with the cycle that we were in this year for November. And so I just wonder, what people's thoughts might be about the proximity of a town election and town council to a referendum on the school.
Michael, that as a political, that's probably best left to the political scientist, but you could make the same argument just with the residential ballot this year. Yeah. That it's that polarized. Who knows? I don't even know where to begin in opining on that. It's you could look at if it was on this November's ballot with where we stand. What's the impact of that? I don't know. Yeah, either that or you're looking to get rid of me, right?
No, no. Chris, at the present moment, we can't afford to lose
I'm
any more
just
people
kidding.
on this group.
Just kidding. I will again repeat for the record, I'm 100% behind the project. As former chair of the Board of Education, this is my baby.
But I just wondered, is that a plus or a minus?
I don't know. I wouldn't know where to begin, Michael. I honestly, as I said, it's the same thing. Would it be, if it was on now with everything that's going on with the presidential level, would it be a plus or a minus? I don't know.
Yeah, it's something we need to think about. I mean,
Yeah.
we talked
Yeah.
about.
Oh, no, it's
on
a
the
valid point.
presidential ballot,
Yeah.
so
No, we did.
It's something to consider.
Oh, it absolutely is. We considered it. I mean, we considered that was one of the metrics. Yeah, obviously was.
Yeah, would it get more people out to vote?
Yeah.
Exactly. You have turnout. You have different turnouts with different type of election, who's on the ballot. So I mean,
Yeah.
these are all things to consider. If it's even putting a referendum as a standalone referendum versus putting it on an existing budget referendum or the local election. So these are all things to consider when putting the project out.
And Kat, that doesn't, because it's not a national election, that doesn't affect our blackout, right?
So I did reach out to the town clerk. Devin and I have been corresponding with her just to confirm. She said she won't know exactly until after January, but she will let us know, because that was my concern, is with the presidential, we would have had to approve it. I believe it was back in late August, early September, and then that affects our blackout period, because when the town council approves schematic design and sends it to referendum, that's when we start. So that's another thing to consider if that affects it, because typically you have the target referendum date 10 days before you have a town meeting when you send it to referendum, and then the council has to approve it within a certain time period prior to that. So this is all regulated by our charter as to how our process is conducted. So kind of backing things out and playing around with it to make sure we get it out at the right time.
Yeah, and all considerations that I think we need to document, that we, if associated to an option 2, whatever that may mean, a Q4 referendum, these are all things that we're thinking about that we don't know the answers to, but I think need to be out there as part of the conversation and part of the considerations as we come to the table and really start having, conversations that move us closer to a decision on this.
I guess I'll
Can I
chime
ask
in.
you? Go ahead, Wendy.
Okay, yeah, I guess I'll come from a parent education route with some questions that I think might come up. I guess definitely the questions are, how is COVID affecting the classroom and the classroom sizes? How long is this going to last? And I also know that right now with schools being in hybrid and not in full participation could be a factor. And I know some schools are starting to come back full time, but you still have that cohorts that are distance learners only and parents that are not bringing them back. So with that said, I'm just saying, we haven't returned back to status quo with our regular school. And I think that's going to be a factor. And especially with the news and all the other anticipations coming up. And I think a lot of us are just waiting to go back to normal in the classroom. But I'm just fearful that bringing this to the table before we go back to normal in the classroom could be a factor. So I'm just mentioning that.
So I can speak to just the going back. So we're back pre-K-8 full in person. We have about 25% overall that have picked cohort C, which is remote learning. Surprisingly, as we've gone back to full in person, we have more students opting out of cohort C and coming full in person. We did not anticipate that. So I say 25%, but it could have changed now that we're full in person pre-K-8 as of today, because 7 and 8 went back today. We have postponed our high school full in person because we did experience a few positive cases at the high school due to a social gathering outside of school. And we, per the Farmington Valley Health District, we have to wait and see if there's any impact due to close contact within sports and the school day. So we're monitoring that with the Farmington Valley Health District right now, and we will set a new date for full in person for the high school. I would say that some of the Scott can add on to my statements about the challenges of the high school and full in person. Certainly very narrow hallways are a challenge when you're talking about trying to prevent any close contact. And close contact is within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. So we try to prevent that close contact as much as possible and to the greatest extent we can. Classrooms, because of the percentage that are engaged in remote learning, that's helped because we have smaller class size. I think the real challenges are lunch. You know, we already have an undersized cafeteria at the high school. You add COVID into this, and now we have significant challenges with lunch, and we have to use gym spaces and other spaces that then take that programming offline. And we've had to change our schedule at the high school, especially because no high school in Connecticut can cohort like we can K-8, and cohorting is another mitigation practice that's very important when it comes to contact tracing when we have a positive case. So there's lots to consider when we talk about our building. I think our proposed building has a much larger cafeteria, which would help. Larger hallways, which would definitely help. I would say when we look at an exemplar for a COVID situation in Farmington, it's Westwoods. And we see a lot of similarities between Westwoods and the proposed new high school, which is promising when we're dealing with a pandemic. And so that's kind of an overview. I would just say from my perspective as superintendent, and I would say that the June 2021 date is an important date to at least submit it for reimbursement. And one of the reasons I would say that we were given some flexibility, even if we had submitted it this past June 2020, that there was some flexibility that we could go into beyond the November date to do a referendum. And I would want to see if we could achieve that same flexibility if we were to do the June 2021 submission for reimbursement. I think you can have a referendum up until November 15th. So I think we should be open to other dates other than just that November date. There's lots of districts that have done it in September and October. And the last thing I would say is if we continue to push this out, which I completely understand and know that, you know, this is a very uncertain and difficult time, we have to start talking about the cost of doing nothing. During this time, we have major issues at the high school that will need to be addressed. Just over time, you know, we've been doing our very best. And we had a fabulous director of facilities that, you know, was there when we had experienced maintenance issues and things that have failed up there at the high school. And so it's just something that I would want everyone to consider, including town council, that some funding for the unanticipated maintenance and repairs that we're dealing with at the high school, that would be an important additional step. So I'll stop and I'll just say, I'll ask Scott if he has anything to add when it comes to the high school and COVID-19 and how we're dealing with this challenging time.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, just a couple of things. I think you made a lot of great points there in terms of the challenges. There's no doubt that the high school itself and the building presents challenges. There are certain areas of the building where when you're not in a pandemic, you're lucky if you can get 18 desks in a classroom because they were designed at a different time for schooling. So those things will exist regardless. Just a couple other considerations. We have real maintenance issues now. I know our lawns got a little bit of water over the last few weeks, but when you have a weekend where it rains all weekend, we have issues in the high school that our team has to mitigate, including this past weekend. So those issues, from a building perspective, will continue to be there. Additionally, as Kathy mentioned, the programmatic limitations based on things like our cafeteria and our library. While it's not in use as much as it would be on a normal basis, our auditorium becomes another place. Those are all places that serious consideration is needed. In addition, that around the corner, one way or another, NEASC is looming as well. And so I just think those are I understand completely the challenges of the time in terms of the impact, and at the end of the day, this is a community-based decision. It's the community's choice, but our kids continue to need more from our facility, and I think those challenges remain regardless of what's happening with COVID. And I wish we had more to offer. I wish we were in person right now. The combination of the public health issues that arose at the high school over the last couple of weeks, in conjunction with when we do go full person, there's no doubt we'll still have challenges there that we just can't mitigate because of the way the building operates. And when that comes, the parents of the community will hear from us, and they'll know what we can do well and where the challenges arise. And much of it will come to the inability to create distance in a lot of places when we bring more kids back.
I think the other thing too to consider is, as we move forward in the years ahead, thinking about deferred capital and dollars that have not been spent. Some of the things that we've seen as we went through the building and designed the current building to make those changes, what the cost would be for those to implement those capital improvements versus what the escalation might be for pushing a project out further and further. And so just maybe one analytic to consider in that as we go through this.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mark. And as we've been so process driven through this, we find ourselves in a situation of almost kind of a feeling of when we should return. It's very uneasy for me, but I think as all of us, so any kind of analytics we can have that we bring forward, I think are important for us to really discuss, numbers, impacts, things that we're hearing that are real and true and happening right now and will continue to happen, and what those impacts of those things are. So I think not only for us as a committee to help us kind of understand this project as a whole, I think that's important that we continue to gather that, document it, and that's part of our conversations. That it's very hard right now, and again, it all comes down to unknowns, and we're all in it every day of, I'm not quite sure what to do or how to do it or when we should do it for a lot of decisions we're making. But I think the more we can keep it fact-based and bringing, analytics and things forward, I think that's going to serve us the best as we move through these conversations. So we've got a couple tonight, I think, that we can start thinking about how we pull that data together and really think about what the impacts of those things are. We might not use all that information right now. It might not be pertinent right now, but I think at some point, these analysts are going to be important to us as we continue the conversation. Anybody else have anything, just kind of your thoughts or concerns, anything else, pros, cons, anything like that, that you think it's important for us? Again, this will not be the last time we're having this conversation, so don't feel like if you don't get it out now that it'll never happen. We're going to continue This will obviously be the bulk of our conversations moving forward, in addition to, so there's really kind of a two-pronged approach here. Let's keep having these conversations, learning as we go, really having, valid discussions on what makes sense, what doesn't, bringing those analytics forward as we know them. That's kind of one prong that we need to take. The other one is preparing, as we talked about, is being prepared as we can for option one, whatever that looks like, and a potential option two, whatever that looks like. And I think we're going to get some more team members. We're going to get Tall Timbers on board. We're going to continue those conversations. We're going to get to the table with the people that need to help us make this decision, so that we're making these steps together. And I think that's really the important part of the process. So that's kind of how I picture it. And what I'm thinking here is that, I will take some time and think about everything that I heard in this conversation. I'll give certainly people another opportunity if they want to before we adjourn to add anything else, but kind of start documenting thoughts, conversations of this committee, our concerns, so that we have that, and we'll just keep adding to that as we learn more. Does anybody else, anything else they want to make sure that or anything that's top of mind tonight as we start having these conversations? All right, great. No, I think that's a good start. And I think the more often we can talk about this, and again, I think sometimes we are in these meetings and you feel like you need answers. We just don't have them right now. But again, the more we know, the more we learn, the more we discuss, the more we are collaboratively, I think we're going to get there step by step. And that's the best we can do right now. So I don't want anybody ever to think I can't raise an issue, and if I don't have an answer to it, that's not where we are right now. And anything that we want to discuss, I think, needs to go out on the table so that we have that as a consideration. So, all right. Excellent. All right, I appreciate everybody's candor. I appreciate the conversation. I think it's super important for us. It's where we are right now. And I think, as we move forward, this will continue to be an item on our agenda as we move forward. So if there's nothing else, I just want to give everybody one last opportunity. If there's anything else we didn't discuss or anything else they want to bring up. All right, excellent. So final agenda item, if I could get a motion for adjournment.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Discussion. Johnny, I appreciated the cameo. Little one on your lap. Makes all of us smile. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, unanimously approved. We will adjourn at 8:08.